Hey there, Wendy here with Jazzydoodledesigns. And before we embark on our African journey, I thought maybe we would do a color along in the Symphony of Cute Animals. This was the second most requested book in my poll, so I wanted to make sure to give a little love to the people that chose this book. And Valentine's Day is coming up, and I thought this would be kind of a fun one with this little mouse couple ordering dinner. So my thoughts are, I'm going to use some pan pastels just to do my background. I saw another lady that had made this background like a brick background, and then inside here she made it like a window. And I really like that idea. Now, she took her window all the way up here. I'm not. I'm just going to have my window be, because I'm not sure what this is. Is it a bed frame? Is it, so I thought it would look cute to do like a window. And I'm not going to do brick. I'm just going to do kind of like a stucco wall type of thing. And then, you know, more traditional fruit colors with the reds and, you know, the mushroom, the eggplant, the onion, the peppers, all of that. And we'll just see which colors develop in terms of the clothing and stuff. So that's kind of how I do things, is I pick things that I know I want. Like, I know I want my strawberry red. So then I try and balance that somewhere else in the picture, maybe a red onion or maybe a red pepper. If these are going to be plums, these could be pears, they could be peaches. I mean, you could really, like, you know, we could have green grapes, we could have red grapes. So I'm going to try and work on things that I know what color I want, and then we will kind of fill it in based on what colors do we need to balance out the picture. That's kind of how I work in general. Now, I do have some ideas in mind. I feel like this is a pear, so I'll probably make these plums. These are definitely blueberries. Eggplant, definitely, so more of a purplish color here. So I'm thinking I'll probably want to make maybe these grapes more of that purple color, and then maybe these grapes more of the green grape color. We also have red grapes. So like I said, I'm just gonna try and balance everything out. But I really love coloring food. So hopefully this turns out great, and I appreciate you being here. So if you're new here, welcome to my channel, and to all of you that have returned, it's good to see you here again. Now, I'm using pan pastels simply because they allow me to put down a base layer of color very quickly. It's very easy on the hands, and as you can see, I can go over everything, and then I'll just use an eraser to erase it from where I don't want it. This makes a very quick and easy way to lay down that initial base color, so that when you go in, like with colored pencil, there's already the tooth of the paper somewhat filled, and your color goes on smooth, and you just don't have to work quite as hard. Now I'm showing the colors that I used. That last one was turquoise tint, and I am using a little bit of a different applicator here, just because I don't want to mix the blues with this very light color. If you're using similar colors, you don't really have to change colors. You just got to be mindful. You can wipe it off like on a paper towel or something, but just be gentle with the little soft applicators. Now, You can use other kind of things like makeup sponges. I don't find that they work 100% as well, but they're not bad. Now next up, I'm going to go in with my darker tone. I think it's Raw Umber Shade. And I'm going to go into the areas that would be like the floor. You can add this, wherever you'd like. I do miss a couple of places, because that's what I do. If you've ever watched my channel, you'll know. I always, underneath that mouse's little chair, I miss a little spot. And that's fine. I touch it up with a pencil later, no big deal. Now next I'm going to go in and I'm going to erase all of the areas where I don't want pastel. Now, in some ways this is an optional step. With this darker tone, I would definitely erase it down at the bottom. But those lighter tones, you could probably just leave them there and go over with your colored pencils, because colored pencil goes over pan pastel very well. So I didn't show all of that process just because I'm pretty sure you know how to use an eraser. Now here I'm just adding, I was going to add that neutral gray and I realized it just wasn't what I needed. So I went back in with that tone that I had at the bottom and I'm just adding in some darker tones. I want it to be a little darker in some spots and I want this to look uneven, kind of like stucco. So I'm just putting little dabs of color and you can see it looks hideous. Looks like I'm giving my paper chicken pox. But that's okay because we're going to blend it out here in a minute and it's going to be just fine. So use whatever colors you have here. I'm using this Payne's Gray and the Raw Umber, and I'm just going through and just adjusting the colors somewhat. So after you've added in your little chicken pox, then go in and with your lighter tone, what you used on the background, we're just going in and smoothing and blending this all out. Now I am going to be going over this at the end with colored pencil, but you don't have to. Pan pastel can be your final layer for sure. So at this point, I'm just moving on and I'm going to use Prismacolor pencils throughout this entire project. So I'm going in with this Kelly green into the center of these little leaves. And then I'm going to work my way to the lighter tones. Now I go over both what I've already colored as well as extending it out. Sometimes I go over the dark, sometimes I don't. If you go over it, it will lighten it up a little bit. If you leave it dark, then you'll get a little bit of a darker look. And I like varying it up to where none of these leaves looked exactly the same. So I finally go in with the pale sage and I still have a little bit up at the tippy tops that I'm leaving white. And I'm going to go in with white and blend this all out. Now I'm simply going to repeat the process as I did before, just to add another layer of color. If you like the lighter tones, you could have left it there, but I wanted a little bit more of a green tone and less, to me it looks very pale sage there. So I'm just literally repeating what I did the first time, just in one more layer. Now you could stop at any point that you find it to your liking. I think it looked kind of pretty with that dark and then the light. But I do continue to blend it out a little. Next up, let's go into our blueberries. So I'm using this Mediterranean blue, and I am doing the lower, probably maybe half of the blueberry. Now blueberries have a lot of variation in tone, so I'm leaving the bottom part because I want that to be dark, but blueberries just have a lot of variety of blues, so you don't have to be super precise with this. If yours is different than mine, that's okay because no two blueberries are the same. But this is kind of like my general base color. Now next I go in with the darkest tone, and I'm going to go around the bottom of the berry and also around anywhere there's the little, where the stem would be. I just want to add a little depth there with that darker tone. Once again, not being super worried about, is this a third of the way up? Is this a quarter of the way up? Some berries can be a lot darker. Other berries will be a lot lighter. It doesn't really matter. Okay, next is this endothrone blue. This has a lot of purple tone to it. So this just adds another layer for depth of color. Now personally, it makes them to me just a hair too vibrant, but I like the purple tone to it. So just be cautious when you're laying this down. Don't get crazy with it. Well, unless you want to. Next, I'm going in with this Cool Gray 90. If you don't have this, you could use black, but we're just adding some darkness to the stems and to the very base of all of the berries where the shadows would be. Now all of this that I'm doing, I'm using, I would say, a medium light pressure. I'm definitely not just kissing the paper, but I'm not bearing down either. Now here I add a few little blemishes to the berries, right? These are those little dark spots that you see in the berries, whether they got a little bruised or just they naturally occur that way. Now this black grape I'm adding where I haven't colored before and then pulling it down a ways into the actual whole berry. But a lot of what I'm covering is going to be not all, but the majority of the white that I've left at this point. In some areas I'm leaving a little more white. That's going to be your highlight area. So like that one that's kind of sticking up has a little more highlight than these that are faced a little differently. So this was the initial color that we used. And I'm just kind of going over everything. And you can see this really blues up the berry, so to speak. It kind of brings it back into the blue tones. It's funny how when you layer the pencils like that, it really changes the feel of them. But you can see I'm not trying to cover every single little piece of the berry. Personally, I think they're looking pretty good at this point. In fact, I would probably stop coloring the berries at this point. But I don't. So you can take a look at how they come out, but I want to caution you to take a peek at how your berries are looking at this point, because in retrospect, which, you know, there's no looking back when you're doing your own coloring, but if you're doing a coloring lung, you have a lot of different choices, and if one of which would be to stop at any point where the artist maybe takes it a little too far. Now, I don't feel like the berries turned out bad, but I feel like, given the overall tone of this whole picture, I wish I would have stopped before I did these last couple of steps here. Because I feel like once I added that Indothrone blue, now I feel the need to blend it out using the Mediterranean, and just overall I feel like I lost out on that, the more subtle blue purple feel that we had going prior to these last blue layers. So take that for what you think it's worth. So now I add a little bit of white. You can see I'm just trying to get a little more natural berry look back. So I add a little bit of white here. And then I decide to add another tone, this black cherry. And I go into the darker areas. And while, like I said, I'm not unhappy with how they turned out, but I wish I would have stopped sooner. Okay, so next up I'm going to color this scale, and I'm just kind of coloring it like it was silver. So we want to use some really deep tones like black or a really dark gray. Contrast is what makes things look shiny. So we're definitely going to want some black and some white. So I'm putting in just little strips of black here and there. Now, I am not the best one for metals, but here I'm using the 10% gray, which is the lightest cool gray that I have. And we're going in, what is that, vertical stripes of color. Now, because this little bowl is kind of curved, if you notice, my vertical lines flow with the curve of the bowl. Do you see how I'm at an angle here? I'm going up and down, but at an angle. I hope that makes sense. It sounds ridiculous, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing and it makes sense. But I am just trying to add these different variances of gray to indicate where the light is reflecting differently. So you want to leave a little bit of white in between all of these. Now, you could definitely go in with a Posca pen. In the end, I chose not to use any Posca on this at all. Now, I'm putting this French gray in because I wanted it to have a little bit of a warmer tone too, almost like maybe the light is just reflecting on it a little differently, but you can see how it just changes it up a little bit. I kind of like how it worked. I'm still trying to figure out all of this, the metal, because while you know the concept, it's often harder to execute it, isn't it? But, and then I'm kind of blending out just the little, to where I don't have any rough edges, so to speak. Now, in some cases, it works better. The shinier you want something, the less blendy I think it probably should be. I don't want this to be hyper shiny, like there's a light bearing down on it and it's reflecting. I just want it to look a little bit like it's metal. Now here I forgot to put down my little card, but I'm using lime peel, and I will use it again, and the number will be on that. Sorry, I don't really have anything profound to say about this. You lay down the color. I'm leaving like little strips of white in between where the veins are. Does that make sense? So if you look, I'm kind of running that darker tone through the leaf and not filling the entire segment between the artist's drawn veins. I think you can really see on this one the little white. Now bear in mind, if you look at those last leaves, they don't have any white, and that's okay because all of these leaves are going to be slightly different. So here I go in with my darkest color, once again doing the same thing, going over the same area, just adding more color in some areas, less in others. Here you see I skipped a couple veins. There's no right or wrong way to do this because all leaves are different. So this is just kind of getting them the way you want them. And sometimes when you start coloring, you look at this and you're like, oh, this is such a hot mess. You have to be a little patient with your coloring and be like, okay, this doesn't look the way I want it. What can we do about it now? So here I go in with this espresso, which is a brown gray tone. And I'm just adding it kind of to the center, sometimes on the edges. I just want to really deepen the color here and just give these kind of a little bit of a different look. But you notice I didn't take this color on every single area, and I'm not pulling it all the way out to the tips. So now I'm back with the lightest color and going over things. Once again, not hitting 100% of the white, but a lot of it. Just really adding that variety of color to these, because each layer is going to change the color of the leaf. But at this point, you should have the majority of your leaf colored. So this is kind of the main overall color that you're going for. Okay, so I'm going in with my darkest tone, not counting the espresso, my darkest green, and I'm just really going over the entire leaf. And you can see how those lighter tones definitely add something to it, but the overall color of the leaf is more like this kelp green. Now, if you wanted them to be lighter, you could have used the olive green to do this. I feel like all the layers kind of lend themselves to creating the overall look. So while I have this espresso out, I'm going to go ahead and add in the shading for our bell pepper. So these are kind of adding a little base underneath the colors to just make them a little darker. So this is where the shadows would hit, where less light would hit is where I'm adding that. And I go ahead and do it on my onion here while I've got the pencil out. I'm not always this I don't always plan ahead this far, but I was kind of proud of myself for doing that. So now I'm going to add the highlight to my bell pepper, so along the spots where more light would hit. And then I just go in with my kelp green for the little stems here. Now this is the overall tone of the core of the pepper, or the whatever that's, the stem, whatever you want to call it. But you can see how by laying down that espresso first, it really just saturates that color and makes it more green brown instead of just more of a more vibrant green. Now I realized I had the wrong color there. I wanted cream, but I had sand, so I had to do a little switch. That's what that was. But so you can see how that back side of that yellow is a lot brighter. But I'm just adding in some highlights here with that cream. Sometimes if you put in your highlights first, then you know where to keep them. You can always push into them. But I find that sometimes if I don't put them in, it's really easy for me to pull these darker colors into areas where I might have wanted more highlight. So I'm just working my way back now into my oranges. Now this pumpkin orange is kind of a rustier orange as opposed to like orange, which is what I want. Now this Crimson Lake is too, but because I added that espresso, you're going to see how it's not as punchy as my swatch card, and look how much brighter it is up there at the top where I didn't have it. Where I didn't have the espresso. You see how much more vibrant that red is. And I'm okay with that because those are the areas that are getting more light. And then down in those shadows, I want it to be more of that desaturated red. And I'm just working my way back up through the colors. And you can see I didn't leave much out of that cream, but because it was there, now I'm not trying to add it in now as a layer on top. It's coming from behind. I just find that easier in general. And now you can see that my little bell pepper has some shine to it. Now I think it has a little too much shine, so I go in with my cream and kind of knock that back just a little bit. So you can see it still looks shiny, but it's not like plastic shiny. It's more like reflections or like it's highlighted. But once again, that choice is up to you. You might prefer it with the more high, the high contrast, but you see how that contrast made that look shiny. Now I'm taking that espresso and going along the edges, and I really like this look. And I think that's why I wish I would have stopped earlier with the blueberries, because they had a little more desaturated look before I put those final blue layers in, which made them more vibrant. Next up is our little turnip greens. Now, I took a lot of artistic license with the turnip greens. If you look at turnip greens, they don't look like this. Now, I'm not super familiar because I'm not from the South, but I bet y'all from the South could tell me what they look like. But that's the beauty of coloring. We get to color it the way we want, not necessarily the way it is. So I'm just going in with the lime peel. I want the veins of this to be quite a bit lighter. So now I'm going in, and just like we used the espresso on our pepper, I'm using this 70% gray here in the center of our leaves just to deepen this area. Now you could use any color. So you could use a sepia here, you could use the espresso here, you can use cool grays, you could use warm grays. I really like French grays. I am definitely more drawn to warmer colors in terms of, I like blues and greens, so not necessarily warm colors, but warmer versions of those colors, if that makes sense. Now I am trying to give some variance to the greens so that everything isn't all samey in terms of the green. But if you'll notice, I've used olive green now, both in those last leaves as well as these. And yet they have a little bit of a different flavor. And a lot of that is done because of the basing. Some of it is done with whatever color you're using with it. So like in the other one, we used that kelp green, and the olive was more of the mid-range that we used. Whereas here, I'm using the olive green more as my darker tone. But because they both have olive green, they're going to be cohesive in the overall picture. At least I think so. The jury might still be out amongst yourself. And then I took that lighter tone that I used on my veins, which is the lime peel, and I go around all of the edges. Just blending it into that olive green. And look what a difference it makes. Even though I use the same colors as the other leaves, they don't look the same. Now I'm going to repeat this process just to add another layer of color. To me, they looked a little washed out. Okay, so now I decided to take some cream and just really brighten up the edges. Once again, that's kind of a personal preference because there's a part of me that says I probably should take that cream and put them on those ones on the left-hand side, but I haven't. Now here I'm adding the sand, as when you look at plums, they often have a lot of different colors depending on the type of plum it is. So I add that sand in because as I go over these things with the red, it's going to turn into kind of an orangier color. So this will act as my highlight without making it like super shiny, right? And without having it be white. Now the indigo is going to allow me to add some shading without really desaturating it to where, you know how when we look at that pepper, it looks dark and brownish? I don't want my plums to look brownish. So I'm using this indigo blue because as we add our red over it, it's going to create a purple tone. But we're going to have the shading and the coolness of the blue. Okay, so sorry about that. I put the black grape card up, but this is actually black cherry that I'm using. And you can see that as I use this deep red tone, as I go over the blue, it creates a really lovely purple. But as I go over the Tuscan red, it creates kind of a red-violet, which is really what I'm going for here. I want the variations in colors. I want you to also notice that as we go over those blues, it leaves kind of that dusky, almost white look that we get with blueberries and plums. Now we definitely got too much yellow. Sorry, that's me just showing you that I was an idiot. Now I'm going over it with the black grape. So this is a little bit more in the purple tones. Because overall I want these plums to be more of a purplish, but I really like the kind of red violet that I'm getting. But as I go over the sand, you can see that too creates a different color. Almost like an unripe look to it. You know how they get that little, like they haven't quite come into their own. Now you can play around with how big you want that color to be. I'm off to sharpen the pencil. Now I decide here, you know, how much of that unripened color you want. And here I decide that I really don't want it at all on this back end. So I try really hard to go over it and even eliminate that area where that sand was, where up here at the front, I'm going to leave it a lot more like I'm not going to press down as hard. And this is just a back and forth game, guys, as far as what color do you like, what color do you think adds the overall tone that you want, right? Do you want it to be a little more, maybe you wanted your plums to be a little more red. And you could definitely use, you know, a crimson red or something like that. Here I choose to use pink to blend it out, just to bring a little bit of those brighter tones into it, a little bit of that duskier look. But maybe you don't like that look. I wasn't digging it, so I decided to go in with the cherry and use that more as my blender. It really just depends on the look that you're going for. Now on the one in the back, I felt like it was much more in shadow and I wanted them to be a little darker, so I went in with the black grape. Now around the stem there, I felt like it needed to have a little bit more of like an artichoke color, kind of that brownish yellow. I knew what I wanted, but I couldn't find the pencil. You ever have that happen to you? And then I just add in a little bit here and there to just change it up. Okay, so let's work on our onion a little bit. We're going to go in with sand. And I'm just adding kind of the areas. I'm leaving a little bit of highlights with the white. Then I'm going to go in with goldenrod, kind of down in where there would be a little more shadow. So right around the curve, around where the fattest part of the onion is where I'm going to have my highlights. I feel like a dealer in poker, shuffling the cards. Now onions to me have kind of this orangey color. I felt like I didn't leave enough highlight there, so I just erased a little bit. Going in with my sienna brown, kind of going over the top of all of that on that back side. And then once again, dropping down in where the shadows would be. Now I felt like I wanted it a little darker, so I'm kind of using some flicking motions like you would do for hair, because onions have those little lines in them. Okay, now I want to brighten it up a little bit, so I'm going back in with that sand, kind of going over all the top of the lighter area. Now I want a little more brown tones here in the back part, more in the shadows. Because onions, while we say they're yellow onions, they definitely have kind of orangey or brown tones. But I'm just layering these up. Once again, I wanted a little bit more highlighted area or a lighter area, and I felt like it was too dark, so I just lightened it up a little bit. And I didn't feel like I had a good transition there. And in the end, I really liked how it looked with just me erasing it, and it kind of stained it there. And then I go in with white. Now I'm deepening up things just in the very corners. and up into that stem area and on the back side there. And just adding a little bit more of this sienna brown, which gives it more of that, I don't know, orangey or brown color. Next up is our eggplant. Now, the majority of eggplants are dark, but they definitely have, you know, the brighter pop of color where the light hits them. So just like we did with our plums, I'm using that blue as my shadow color or as my base layer there. And then I'm using dark purple to be the overall color of the eggplant. And by going over that brighter purple, we're going to automatically get our highlight. And by going over that blue, it's going to deepen the color. And you can see it really changed it. It made it more blue purple. Now here I'm adding quite a bit more pressure. So normally I've been coloring with a pressure of maybe a 2 or 3. This is probably a 4 or 5. I'm not burnishing, I'm not bearing down, but I'm definitely pushing down a little bit. And you can see, true to Wendy fashion, I missed that little piece right there by the mouse. So try and get that little area right where I'm butted up against right there. For some reason, I just don't. And then I gotta go in and get it later. But I'm using this cool 90% gray to kind of go over it all, just to really deepen the color. So here I'm using this sienna brown, which I used in my onion. I'm going to use just to add a little bit of my underlayer for this eggplant. Now, I catch on to the fact that there's a second eggplant, so I get the leaves at the same time, but you should probably color the eggplant when you were coloring the first eggplant. It would make your life a lot easier. But you know, I always have to be a little different. And then once again, using that same green that I've been using in the other leaves, I'm using it here, but because I'm putting it over eggplant and I'm putting it over sienna brown, it definitely looks a little different, but not glaringly so. But it just adds enough interest that people don't, so your picture doesn't look like, you know, like it was all colored with one green pencil. Now I wanted it a little more green, so I went back in with my green. And now I'm repeating the same steps that I did for the other eggplant. Okay, next up is our turnip itself. I am using lavender, and I am just making horizontal strokes just in random places, and then doing the same thing with a little less with this dahlia purple, which is what I used for the highlight in the eggplant, and then going over it all with cool gray, just kind of blending it all out. Now I'm going to be working on the basket. So everywhere that the basket is woven and there's shadow, I'm going to be using this sepia color. So and then I'm also using sepia on the very ends of where, if you look at the weave right there, anywhere it ducks under, I am going to use the darker color. And as we go along, I'm going to use the brighter colors on the part that is more popping out. Does that make sense? I hope so. So this sepia is just being used on where it dips in. Next I'm going in with sand, and this I'm going to put on the part that is popping out, the most curved part. So this is where the sun would hit more. Now bear in mind, this is not going to be a two-toned basket. There's going to be more than two colors. But that's what I'm doing with this sand color. Now next, this is kind of more the overall tone of the basket, and I'm blending in where the sepia and the sand meet. So just adding a little to the sepia on each side and blending it into that sand color. You can use flicking motions like you would use for hair. That would work out really well here, and I do that sometimes. And sometimes it's just more efficient to do a little bit more of a scrub. But this is just giving it the overall brownish tone that we want it to have. It's really hard when you're filming. I would encourage you to flip your book and put it at the angle that is best for your hand, because this is not the best angle for me. But I always hate when I'm watching videos and the person's flipping their book all over and you're just like, I mean, once in a while I understand, but if it's, too much, it's just, it kind of breaks up the rhythm as a viewer. So bear with me if my when my strokes get a little sloppy sometimes. Because if it looks awkward, it probably is because it is. Now I want a little more golden brown now. So I'm taking this sienna brown and I'm kind of blending lightly over everything. Not 100% into the sand, and I'm not trying to obliterate the other colors. I'm just adding colors. Because if you've ever looked at a basket, they're often quite a bit of variance in color and tone. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. I felt like raw umber? Excuse me. The raw umber and the sepia had a little bit more of a gray tone than I was intending. I want it to have a little bit more warmth. So that's what this is going to do. And then I should go over it all again in the sand. Okay, next is our little mushroom guy. So using those flicking motions like you would for hair, we're going to apply some putty beige. I feel like this is a pretty good mushroom color. And then doing the same thing with beige sienna. Not sienna. I'm just adding a little bit of color. Now with the sepia, I'm going to go in and do this shadowy area where it's kind of tucked under the mushroom and back, nestled in a little bit. And then I'm going to draw that color up into the mushroom where the artist has drawn those lines and just kind of emphasize those darker areas. And then I'm going to put in some little dots right there. Now I want to bring in a little bit of this cream color because I felt like the mushroom was a little too pinkish, and this is going to give it more of the neutral tone that I was looking for. Now you can do, for our final element in today's color along, we're going to go in and do this basket. Now like we did before, we're going to use our darker tones where our basket is dipping in you can see those little straps coming over the top, and it's causing a little indentation. So I am just bringing in this light umber into those areas on the edges and where the actual basket weave kind of dips in. And then on the ends of each of these, the little braid at the top. Sorry, my hand's in the way, but I'm just doing it at the top and the bottom, which in this case, there isn't a big area, so I'm not super worried. I just don't want to get too, like, I wouldn't want to be uniform across the top. So next we go in with our sepia, and once again, using kind of those flicking motions, going from the top to the bottom, where it kind of goes into the basket, we're going to be using our darker tones. And then I decide that where the darkest shadows are, I'm going to go ahead and use that sepia in the actual basket itself, just for those darkest areas. And I'm going in with my sienna brown. Do you see a pattern here of how I use the same colors but with different colors, or sometimes I start with the sienna brown, sometimes I finish with it. Oh, excuse me, guys. But that gives it a little bit of a varying look from piece to piece. So both baskets have their own visual appeal, and yet they're not so different that it's jarring. So I'm just using those flicking motions and going in at the two deepest ends and leaving that middle a little bit uncolored at this point. Now I'm blending it all out with the cream. There we go. Now I got my hand out of the way. Now you can see there's a pretty big variance here. And that's okay, because we're not done yet. But each layer just adds a little something. And I decide that it's a little too yellow, so I go back in with my light umber. And now when I go over, just like I did before, I've got that cream already there, and I can blend right into that cream. And because that cream is there in the center, it's going to automatically be a lighter tone for us. Now this is something that you can just fuss with until you have it the way you want it. You can go darker, you can go lighter. Here I'm going a little darker with this light umber, but I could go in with the sepia and do the same, or the sienna brown. Either one. Both will give you a little slightly different look. But you can see if you go in dark where it dips in and lighter on the little parts that pop out, it gives it the illusion of the curve of the braid. So here I'm just using that cream to kind of blend everything out. Now, if you don't want it to look this yellow, because cream definitely has that yellow tone, you could use like a French gray or like the putty like we use for the mushroom. One of those two colors would work fine too. But yeah, I'm just kind of fiddling till I got it the way I want it. Adding the darks, adding the lights. I think this is a good place for us to stop today. We're about halfway done. I thank you so much for joining me. If you're liking this, please hit the like and subscribe button so that you don't miss part 2. My goal is to have it up on the channel tomorrow. So until then, happy coloring. Thank you for watching another video from Jazzydoodledesigns. If you enjoy adult coloring content, please consider subscribing. You can now find me on Instagram and Facebook as well. I welcome all comments and suggestions. Don't forget to like the video before you go. And until next time, take care.